Okay, I'll go live now and we're ready to go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ConstructionCast. Thank you for joining us this week. This week we're going to be taking a look at procurement, tendering and bidding. This is the last edition we're going to hold before we take a little break for the summer, so we won't be back with the next event till September. As usual, any problems, my colleague Natalie is on the line. Her email address is there on the screen. You can drop her an email or drop a note to her in the chat and she'll try and help you if you've got any problems. And do get in touch over the summer if you've got any particular topics you'd like us to when we come back, or if you'd like to be involved. So as we get started this week, I'm just going to introduce our speakers. We are joined by Sarah Hannaford QC, who is a barrister at Keating Chambers. She was called to the bar in 1989 and appointed Queen's Counsel in 2008. She's ranked a star individual by Chambers and Partners and nominated for the Bar Hot 100. Sarah has a well-earned reputation as the doyen of public procurement bar, and she is known as being unstuffy, client-friendly, and someone who really put herself out for you. Sarah's actually one of the first ConstructionCast guests to return for 2 episodes in a row. She joined us last time when we was looking at expectancies, but as procurement is her specialist, we thought it would be rude not to ask her to join us again this week. Our second guest this week is Jon Williams, who is Managing Director of Strategic Proposals. Jon leads many of their major client assignments, is the proposal assignments in over 30 countries worldwide in sectors such as IT, financial services, outsourcing and logistics. He's a fellow of the Association of Proposal Management Professionals and a certified proposal professional. He's trained nearly 2,000 candidates on how to pass the APMP examinations. And Marian Regan is a senior procurement consultant at Greenville Procurement. Marian has experience in a range of industries in the public, semi-state and private sectors, including electricity, railway, education, healthcare and finance. There's a broad array of technical and commercial experience on infrastructure projects and is considerably experienced in public procurement related regulation and methodology, including procurement strategy and appropriate risk allocation. So thank you to you three for joining us this week. We'll start off with you, Jon, and as usual we want to take a quick look at the COVID situation as we kick off these events. So how has COVID changed the way we're preparing bids and proposals?
Okay, so we've run a couple of research studies during lockdown with people in the bid and proposal community, seeing how it's impacting what they do, and the most recent of those came out a couple of weeks ago. And it's interesting, there's some businesses, obviously some sectors completely rushed off their feet, but for the majority of bidding organizations, things are really slowed down. You know, we're seeing projects put on hold, we're seeing delays to ITTs coming out, we're seeing slower decision making on those bids that go ahead. I've seen comments like a reluctance to commit from clients, fewer meaningful decisions. We're seeing certainly a trend towards clients renewing and extending contracts with their existing suppliers, because that's clearly probably easier to do and less fraught than moving to a new supplier in the current arrangements. And a comment in the most recent survey, you know, it's quite evident to people in the bidding community, in the words of one respondent, that the procurement people sometimes are visibly struggling here. There's a people dimension too, lots of stressed people around. People worried about their well-being, worried about kind of future finances. But the good news we're seeing is people predicting an upswing in bidding activity later in the year. For people in the construction sector, obviously you're well-based with lots of the stuff going on, that your sector is one of those that seems to be bubbling. What does this mean in practice, I think, for bid teams? You know, it's quite hard to build trust with a client virtually. So it means that you have to be a little bit more adept at doing that. We're obviously seeing a move to virtual pitching. That takes quite a lot of thought, quite a lot of care to pitch successfully virtually. There are great opportunities if you are the incumbent supplier to reach out to your clients with a really good renewal proposal, paint the picture of a real win-win about extending the contract. I think there's a real need for pretty ruthless qualification of new business opportunities. If clients are less minded to move away from their incumbent, then I think you have to be really, really focused on, is it worth chasing that opportunity? Is this going to be real? And a real raising of the bar in terms of presentation material. You know, death by PowerPoint is bad enough if you're face-to-face in the room with the client. It's a disaster on a virtual pitch. That brings with it the need for a lot better rehearsal of pitching as well, for virtual pitches where those handovers and that kind of continuity is much more difficult than if you're in the room with the client.
Presenting online is a real different skill to presenting in real life, we've seen. Sarah, from your point of view, how has the current situation changed procurement? And what's the government guidance, and how is that going to be helpful in the current circumstances?
Well, there's really two things to look at, I think. I mean, I echo a lot of what Jon just said, but looking at, first of all, COVID-related procurements and then non-COVID-related procurements. For the COVID-related procurements, back at the beginning in March, the European Commission and the Cabinet Office issued guidance explaining what authorities could do within the scope of the directives and regulations lawfully to procure in the huge rush that they were in. And that mainly related to using the negotiated procedure without advertisement in the official journal. And the Commission made it clear, perhaps somewhat surprisingly, that the directives were considered to be highly flexible. So if you use the negotiated procedure without advertisement, there weren't any procedural rules, there weren't any time limits, there weren't any particular rules that you had to follow, obviously, other than the basic rules of transparency and equal treatment. And the Cabinet Office, in their guidance, echoed this. They said we could use direct awards, although if you read the Cabinet Office guidance along with the European Commission guidance, direct awards aren't always possible. Sometimes you'll need a small, more limited competition unless there's only one supplier available. And both the Commission and the Cabinet Office recommended the use of existing frameworks, if you could justify it on grounds of urgency and so on, extending existing contracts and using the fast procedures that are also available in the regulations. That's the accelerated, open and restricted procedures. But of course, you could only do that if it was strictly necessary. There hasn't, interestingly, been a lot of litigation about COVID procurements so far. I'm involved in one big challenge to a COVID-related procurement, but I haven't come across much else. The question now with COVID-related procurements, I think, is what will be permitted if and when there is a second wave. It is likely to be much harder then to justify urgency within the guidance issued by the Commission and the Cabinet Office. But we'll have to see what happens and what our needs are then, or what the government's needs are then. Non-COVID procurements, I mean, I echo what Jon said. There has been some slowing down, inevitably, of other procurements because of the competing needs on public bodies' time and resources. Some were abandoned, some have been recast to take account of the new normal. And litigation slowed down to start with, very sadly from my point of view, but it seems to have bounced right back and is up and running with a vengeance now, just as I was vaguely thinking of having a stay-at-home holiday. So I don't know.
There we go. Okay, well, thanks for that. Moving on to our kind of main topic today, we're going to come to you, Marian.
Hi,
preparing. How are you doing? How can contracting authorities prepare a tender design to get them the best for applicants?
Well, I think what's kind of important to consider when you're thinking about procurement is more than just tendering. Procurement starts from when you start with a project brief. You need to be considering the markets that you're going to be engaged with, the bidders that you'd like the bidders and suppliers that you'd like to be doing business with. And I think a lot of contracting authorities forget that there's a big part of the public procurement regs, Article 40, which allows you to do market soundings and allows you to consult with the market in terms of helping you formulate the strategy, helping you understand understand what tenderers are good at, what the market is like, maybe what innovation is out there. So I think I think contracting authorities can do a lot more in the early stages. I mean, as a procurement professional and those of us who've prepared tenders in the past, sometimes it's like, we know what we want. Should we ask the procurement department out to help us? And that's very late to get that in. The other thing I think you can do as well is that when we were doing public sector tenders, we are bound by a lot of regs. And here in Ireland, we have what we call the CWMF documents. And they're not necessarily the prettiest of documents. They're not the easiest for companies to use. And especially, I think what's happening, possibly what's coming in procurement is in the public sector, I think we're going to see more companies interested in the public sector on the whole. It's a bad job in the good times, but now it's a good job in the bad times. So I think we're seeing a lot more companies who may be interested now who weren't before. And let's make it easier for them. ourselves in Greenville, we've had some information sessions with tenderers to walk them through the forms to make that easier. In terms of then when you are getting to your tender stage, is make sure everything's very clear. Make sure people understand what's going on. I mean, if you have a confusing tender, if you've got selection criteria that's unclear, then people don't know whether they're in, they're out, will they take a chance? Then, so that's all those pass-fail things. Make those very clear, make those very proportionate. Then, as well as that, when you are preparing your evaluation, ask the questions, and I'm sort of interested in Jon's perspective on this too. Ask the questions that tenderers can shine on. I mean, this is not us asking questions and like generic questions beget generic answers. So if we keep asking the same questions over and over again, tenderers now know. So they're going to be giving us the same answers back again. So I think, and again, that goes back to my first point on the market engagement. And then in terms of the award criteria, make sure you're asking really what you want. And the amount of times people go out and they've put 50% on cost or something like that, and then they're astonished that the cheapest wins. But that's the message you tell the market. The market will react to the questions that you ask. If you put a heavy emphasis on one area, that's how the market will respond. So I think there needs to be a lot more understanding from both sides. The procurement and the bidding communities both need to understand each other a lot better.
Thanks, Marian. And coming to you, Jon, what can people do to ensure they win the tender? And particularly, how can you stand out when the format is tightly defined?
So when my son Benedict was 4, he said, "What do you do at work, Daddy?" And that's quite a hard thing to answer if you're a proposal manager. I said, "I go to work to help business people tell stories." And I think the first thing in terms of trying to win a tender is to understand the story. You know, we always say to people who are bidding, why us, why not them? Why is this client going to choose us rather than the very credible rivals who are going to be bidding against us? And so thinking about the customer, trying to get under the skin of what's really going on here. We use the Spice Girls test for proposal strategy. You know, tell me what they want, what they really, really want, not necessarily what's just written in the request for proposal document. Really being focused on kind of what do we do better? What are the points of difference here? Making it easy actually for the evaluators to choose us. So the storytelling. Marian talked about market sounding. There is, where possible, that early engagement. You know, if the first you know an opportunity is when an ITT lands, maybe that's not got your name written all over it. So trying to work up front with the procurement team, with the end decision makers in the client's organization to understand what's going on, to influence the project. Particularly when it's harder to build rapport in kind of a virtual world. Third thing, you know, write a brilliant document. The power of, you know, really writing good content, really making it look good, really bringing your story to life. I used to work in procurement. I used to be on the board of a procurement consultancy. I saw so many boring, dull, mundane proposals crossing my desk. I eventually got frustrated and told a bidder I could have written a better proposal than you did. And they said, well, come and join us and stop us losing bids in future. So really make your story shine from the page. And on the formatting thing, you know, I get the need for an apples for apples comparison, but at times I do despair at kind of when one of my colleagues calls passive aggressive formatting instructions become almost too prescriptive. And people spend their time worrying about the formatting and less about actually putting across the best possible offer to the clients. So what do you do if, you know, you get these really, really defined kind of formatting requirements? Number 1, groan. Number 2, comply. Number 3, make sure you write even better. And then number 4, recognize that actually the ability to do some of the creative stuff in terms of maybe the look and feel of the document then happens at the pitch or the interview. Because the procurement people who are very, very prescriptive in their invitation to tender on your Arial 9.75 points, these margins, actually probably haven't got around to being quite so prescriptive.
Thanks, Jon. Marian, did you... Sorry about that. A little lag on here. Marian, did you want to comment anything into that?
I think myself and Jon are singing on the same hymn sheet. We might be either sides of the fence, but I'd be the same myself. And in terms of, like, we do sometimes put page limits, but I'm mindful as well with clients, like, you need to put page limits to stop the brain dump and that kind of, that you throw enough pebble dashing at the wall and the right answer is in there somewhere. But you can't have it so prescriptive. I've seen people who want to go, please give a comprehensive response outlining your full methodology to a page limit 2 pages. You're not giving anybody any chance to tell you anything. So I think while you can be a certain length prescriptive, but again, Jon, we spoke the other day. It's like we've all seen the pain of those dull documents, before I did what I did, I was the other side putting bids together. And I think this is really, this sort of thing, Jon, is that, no disrespect to Annie and Sarah, but myself and Jon are very much agreed on this. And this is what about the companies coming together. And I think as well, not to be afraid of that market sounding, because I think sometimes contracting authorities are a bit afeared of talking to tenderers. But before you're in a tender process, there was no tender going on. Talk to everybody. And I think talking to maybe just to Jon or maybe just to one supplier, that's very much, that's a bias. But you talk to all the suppliers. That's research, that's understanding the market, understanding what's out there. And then get the market a bit excited about opportunities that are coming up. Public sector opportunities are great.
Coming to you again, Sarah, when you're bidding and you're preparing your tender, are there any tips you can give afterwards?
Yes, so tips to give to bidders in preparing tenders. I'm going to be, I think, making some of the points that Marian and Jon have just made. And interestingly, I've come up with 6 tips. And one of them was about page limit or word count. So that's obviously something that's very much on all of our minds. So my first tip, and this sounds a bit patronising, is read the instructions if you're a bidder. That means read the question, read the tender rules, and read the mark scheme. You have to read the question to make sure you answer it all. It's no good only answering part of it. And you have to read the mark scheme because you have to know which category you'd like to fall into, which presumably is the top category. If the top category says you can only get into it if you exceed the requirements, then you're going to have to put in some material that exceeds the requirements. Sadly, writing a tender and winning a procurement is not all about being the best supplier judged objectively on your past performance. It's about writing the best bid. So read the question. Second point, use the word count and page limit wisely. Use it just to answer the question, not to explain how great your organisation is, if that's not what the question is about. Third top tip, check the weightings. Make sure you put enough effort into the more highly weighted questions. And don't forget that the way price is often evaluated, weight makes it worth more than it seems. So if you think about this, you might have a procurement which is 70-30 quality price, but if you're the cheapest price, you will get 100% of the price marks. If you've got the best quality bid, you may only get 70% of the quality marks. So the price may be much more valuable than your quality marks. So check the weightings. Fourth point, to avoid disputes, submit the bid in plenty of time. Don't risk missing the deadline because you can't upload it. Fifth, if something goes wrong in the middle of the procurement, remember you need to deal with it then, because procurement challenges have a very short time limit of 30 days from the date of knowledge. If you know that there's a breach in the middle, it's no good hoping you'll win and deciding you'll challenge when you don't win at the time. You have to deal with it at the time. And that means, first of all, corresponding about it or asking a clarification question. And then, if necessary, it means starting proceedings. But hopefully that won't be necessary, but you need to deal with it at the time. And my final tip is, if you're not sure what a question means, ask a clarification. Don't hope for the best and then be rather cross when you didn't understand it in the same way as the authority. You may be right, and you may prove that you're right after a long court case, and I'll be delighted to represent you, but it's not the best way to win.
Thanks, Sarah. Some great tips. We're going to come on to looking at disputes in a little more detail. But before we do, just a reminder to anyone, if you have got questions for any of the panel, you can stick them in the chat box and we'll hopefully have some time for questions at the end. So Sarah, when we're talking about disputes, what are the mistakes that you see contracting authorities make for assessing tenders?
Well, interestingly, the mistakes contracting authorities make are very similar sometimes to the mistakes that tenderers make, I think. The first one is not reading the question. I know that sounds really stupid for an authority. They, after all, set the question. But evaluators sometimes don't read the question when they're trying to assess what mark to give to the answer. The second question, again, the second point, again, very similar to bidders. Authorities sometimes don't read or understand their own mark scheme. Now, it's fair to say that some mark schemes are impenetrable. But you do have to be absolutely clear as an evaluator what the difference between falling within one part of the mark scheme and another is. And so do the requirements in the mark scheme have an and or do you have to meet all the parts of a particular score in order to score within that band, or are some of them alternatives? So that's the second thing, not reading or understanding the mark scheme. Third thing, not reading or understanding the rules. Now, there may be other rules apart from what the question says and what the mark scheme says. There may, as we said before, be rules about word count, about how you format things, about how many attachments you can have and so on. If the evaluators don't read that, then that's not going to end well. Fourthly, making assumptions without checking it out properly within the confines of the answer about what the answer means. Sometimes evaluators simply don't read a question properly, and a bidder will obviously get very upset about that. That's something that should be capable of being sorted out at a moderation or consensus meeting, but don't make assumptions about what the answer means if you're not sure. Fifth point, if you really don't understand, that is what clarification questions are about. So check what the rules of the procurement are, and then ask a clarification question if you can. Don't ask a clarification question if really what you want to ask is whether they can give you a better bid, because that's probably not allowed. So be very careful about what clarification questions you ask. And then final, sixth point, again, terribly basic, but I think lots of contracting authorities make mistakes by not keeping proper, clear notes of the reason for the scores. That should be so easy to do. You just have to agree on what your reasons are and then write them down. But my experience is that many authorities, with the best possible intentions, haven't actually managed to write down what the reasons for the score are before they make their decision, or indeed before the litigation.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And Marian, looking at the procurement process, can the contracting authorities make the process more objective? Do the current process lock out those smaller firms?
I would suggest that the process is objective. As Sarah mentioned earlier on, one of the key principles of procurement is equal treatment. So no firm should be locked out. All tenders are publicly procured over a certain value. Once they're, so in Ireland we have the e-tender system, and they go to OJU. And what we'd say as well is that the stats would suggest that there are a number of SME, like a large proportion of SMEs are winning bids. I think there's some stats in Ireland that we were a little bit higher than the EU average there once in 2018. I couldn't find any more recent stats now this morning, I'm afraid. But where I think a lot of that happens is a lot of the smaller firms just genuinely don't believe that local authorities and public bodies are actually interested in them. They think it's the big boys, and there's a certain amount of firms have it all stitched up. So I think a couple of things that we need to do is on the public sector side is, like, again, go back to my point on market engagement, but also see what we can do about making things easier. Like I mentioned earlier on, we have what we call these CWMF forms. Those of us who are working in the Irish construction industry, they're just delightful forms. And they're the construction management works framework. And they're not, like I say, they're not pretty. And for people who haven't used them before, I'm not sure that incomprehensible is the word. Those of us who use them all the time, they're fine. But if you're new to it. So what we did with the recent local authorities, we actually had an information session out there. It was open to everybody. This is the form. This is how you're going to fill it in. So that's something to do. A lot of, again, make sure that get people more involved. We also, like in Ireland, and I presume it's the same in the UK, we've got explicit government guidance in terms of how we'll get more smaller firms in. And a couple of things that, like, the initiatives that we'd be looking at is making sure, like, see if you can't break down something in a lot. Do you have to go out with a big bang project? Now, obviously, in some big construction projects you will, but you won't have to do them. And maybe talk about breaking it down into lots, make it more accessible to smaller firms. The other thing is, make it cheaper, make it easier for the likes of Jon and his colleagues to do his job. Reduce the administrative burden on the tender. I mean, if you're in a project, if you're bidding for a project, I mean, obviously you have to be tax compliant. You obviously have to, the insurance is in place and all these basic paperwork. But do you have to produce that paperwork for every single tender? So what we do is we look for declarations, and it's only when you're being considered for award. So it's only the winner that's going to have to produce all that paperwork and the rest of it then. So try again, make it easier for the tender to do it. again, be explicit on the SMEs, and go encourage them to try and get involved more. And I think there is a role there to play in terms of industry bodies as well, to encourage their members and say, look, these are opportunities. Let's go for it. And the first time you might not win, second time you might win. And like it's a big pie. Let's all see what share that we can get the SMEs involved in.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great advice. And finally, coming to you, Sarah, before we take some questions from the audience, if we get any in, why do we see disputes arise? And are there any issues you see repeatedly that make disputes more likely?
There are the same issues arise time and time again, and they really are the issues that I identified when I did the top tips for both bidders and for employers. And I'll just go through those again in a second. But one of the other issues I think that makes disputes arise is not to do with mistakes that authorities and bidders have made, but it's actually to do with the mark scheme. If you haven't, as an authority, put together a mark scheme which clearly differentiates between bids, you can get to the ridiculous situation where the winning bidder wins by 0.1%, and which second place bidder for a huge contract would not want to challenge such an outcome? So I do think a top tip for making sure there aren't disputes is for an authority to make its mark scheme differentiate clearly between bidders, because why wouldn't someone dispute an outcome if they're only 0.1% behind, or even 1% behind? So I think that's something definitely to bear in mind. Why do disputes arise? Well, it's all the reasons I gave before. They arise because bidders are very upset that they haven't won, and it may well be because they haven't adopted the tips that I suggested they should adopt before. They haven't read the question properly, they haven't used the word count wisely, they haven't checked the weightings. But because they're very upset, they may still want to challenge. And because authorities make some of the mistakes that we've all identified, a challenge may be on the cards and a win may be on the cards, particularly if the mark scheme means that the second place bidder was very, very close. So the sort of issues that arise all the time are someone not reading the question properly, the authority not reading the question properly, the authority not applying the mark scheme properly, the authority making incorrect assumptions about what the bid might have meant, the authority asking clarification questions, which a bidder says effectively invited the winning bidder to improve its bid. And probably most often what I see is a dispute about the reasons for the evaluation scores being insufficiently clear. I can't stress enough how important it is for an authority to set its reasons down properly and for those reasons to fall within its marking scheme, because in most challenges there will be a challenge to the reasons apparently given or the lack of reasons given.
Thanks, Sarah. Right, we'll take some questions for the audience if any come in. We've not had any yet. But have you got any quick tips for how people can instantly make some improvements? Are there anything you see over and over again that you kind of think, I wish people wouldn't do that, and it would make things so much better?
And I might jump in there.
Yeah, go on, Marian.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to reiterate a few things, and I expect, Jon, given what we've said before, we're probably saying the same thing. But sometimes I think from the contracting authorities side is we need to, and again, what Sarah was saying is we kind of nearly need to think about this as like the exam when you were in school, and read the question, understand where it's going, understand where there's minimum marks. The odd time I would see somebody, and again, pay good attention to the big marks, but don't forget the smaller marks. And especially where there's a minimum criterion in there. I've seen some bidders and ignored the 10% because it was only a small bit, but there was a 5% minimum mark, and they've lost something because, again, those were the rules. Like, read the rules, apply the rules. From a contracting authority point of view, make sure the rules are proportionate, that we've done, and again, ask the right questions. Give Jon and the bidding community chance to give us the good answers, chance to be able to understand the difference. for anybody who's watching from Ireland, I know what it's like to win. Like, I'm from Mayo, so I know what it's like to win by a point, and it stings. Like, if you get beaten by a bigger team soundly, you're fine. It hurts, but you understand. You put on the big girl pants, you go again. But it's that kind of, if it's a fair fight, I don't think people mind losing, because it's time again. So sorry, John, I spoke over you there.
No, that's because I think we're on the same page here. I think if you think of the proposal as being an exam, if you go back to college, before you got to do the exam, you did a lot of study and a lot of homework. And if the first you think about this opportunity is when an invitation to tender lands and you open it up and you start answering the questions, you're way too late. The most successful organizations are ruthless in deciding which deals they're going to chase, put a lot of time in up front once they've engaged with the client to start thinking about their solution, their story, their proposition, their partnering, their finance models to do with the deal. So actually, they have momentum behind them by the time it comes to answering the exam questions. When you then answer the exam questions, it's about having your overall story and win themes in mind that flow through the document. That's the why us, why not them. To echo things Sarah and Marian have said, I have a simple way of phrasing that. ATFQ. Answer the full question. When you write, show that you understand why they've asked the question. Create some empathy. I'm forever saying to teams, so what? Don't talk about the features of what you do. What's the benefit of this to the client? I'm forever saying in your answers, what do we do differently here? And I'm forever saying, prove it. Give me some evidence as you write of what it is that we're doing here that is kind of, we've done similar things for other people in the past that equip us to do this brilliantly for this client. And so there's some pretty simple rules, but then you can't get away from the fact that you also ideally want some good wordsmiths and some good designers around to help bring your story to life.
Thank you, John. I think the so what test is one we quite often apply. I don't often like it, but when you go for everything with a red pen, say, so what? Why does anyone care? What I've done that. It can rephrase things in a different way, can make all the difference. Right, we are running out of time. We've not actually had any questions from the audience.
Annie, if I may I just add? Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, Annie? Of course.
I'm also great in what I call so what twice. So you write something, and then you look at it and you go, so what? What's the benefit to the client? And that helps you improve your answer. But once you've done it and you go, what's the benefit? Ask yourself, so what again? Very often the second time you go, so what? You can start to put kind of pound signs, euro signs on it. And actually, if you can really think about, the real benefit of what you're doing to the client, not only in terms of things makes their life better, but what will this do in terms of real pounds, shillings, pence, euros, cents, then that's immensely valuable to do.
Brilliant advice there. Have we got a comment coming in? I'm not sure. Right, but all that's left is for me to thank you all. So thank you, John, Sarah, and joining us this week. As we said, we're not here next time. We are back in September. All the past videos and this one will go up on the website as well. Just search ConstructionCast. And that's it for this week. And we'll see you very soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye now.
Thanks,